Before we get started, let's talk about Lexington. And hopefully he'll be... Lonnie, he is home now, right? Oh, he's not home yet. All right. He had back and in Nashville. I don't know enough of my Nashville geography. What's a big hospital? Probably where he's at. And so he's glad you're here. And else? Oh, she's... Her car's here. Gone to another class, but was here. I think she sits in the back. Who else do we have? It here. Also, Jericho fell after they encircled for went through talking about faith and the action. Imagine these Israelites after they've traveled for 40 years in the wilderness. They're Ashur, different, and so for all they're looking for. So they're probably thinking in their minds, okay, are we going to build a ramp or with siege? And you can imagine the Jordan, and they get to what? Can you imagine what they'll say about you? And no matter how, no sense at all, he's explained. And I've watched a few. This earthquake would have happened in this timing. Secondly, you had the total destruction. All the wall fell down, complete destruction there. So, the writer trying to get across to us here in Hebrew. All your friends, because you can't go out and drink. Because not a bit. Wait till marriage? No. Doesn't make sense to them at all. But because God. We trust God. God will see us through. When she had received the spies, back to the book of Judges, Rahab the harlot is in the lineage of... Now, how in the world does that happen? Okay? A lot of people have an innkeeper. So she really wasn't. All right. Is that a possibility? Okay. All right. Not only is she a harlot, but what did she do? Is she hit? So you have a liar and you have a harlot there. Well, how do you explain it? In verse 32, is he going through and saying, hey, Rahab is a great, perfect person in every way? By faith, she did what? She received the spies with peace. Faith in that direction. Okay. That's her harlotry? No. For the way in her life that she showed her faith. Historical works for us. Or at the worst of somebody. You notice? Only on those good parts, right? Those same history books, they focus only on the absolute worst parts. Every one of us is a mixture person, and look at them closely enough else. Our job is to find the good, not which is good. Hold up to that which has awesome. Rahab here is not being blessed for being a harlot. And she's not being blessed for her lying. She's being blessed in this passage because of her faithfulness. Understood the teachings of God. Remember, they obviously repented later in life. Israelite nation, she wanted to be on the right side. She was anxious to obey. And she was showed up at church one Sunday, and his girlfriend was actually a prostitute, and he was actually the person that was in charge of her, and actually go to a church somewhere. Bible study with somebody who couldn't read. And that's so hard to do, because I've always said, okay, turn to Acts 2:38, read this verse. Okay, turn to Acts 20, explain to her the gospel of Jesus Christ. They both obeyed the gospel from the world like one of us. You know what I mean? But that's what the gospel is about. You're starting from the very ground and working up. Rahab, she had heard about the winning there in the wilderness. She had heard to follow God, and she was hungry to learn. We're lost in sin. We don't even bother how Jesus acted. What did he do in Luke 15, 1 and 2? He went and met 14 or 15. I think that's pretty interesting. Okay? Now Gideon, and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel. And we hardly ever get to this point. Abraham and on Sarai. We focus on these Jericho. You start finding people and you start reading and thinking, why in the world did he put... I wondered that for the longest time, because read about Gideon. Gideon is hiding in a wine press threshing wheat. Now why is that? He's hiding from the enemy. Up, and you would step on the grapes. And what would happen with the grape juice? It runs down the vat to this Lord's. He is in a ditch, okay? Now, what's he doing? Threshing wheat. What do you do when you're threshing wheat? You throw it down, you throw it in the air, and the husks are gone. Now, yes. Now, if you're in a hole, my way. So why is Gideon wheat? They went over and stole. And so Gideon is hiding stuff. So he is hiding, all right? That's like someone is like, no, you're not really watching what's happening here. And all your people from the... Gideon says, God, I'm not really side. And if it is wet, and it happens. And Gideon says, I'm still not sure. I'm going to lay this fleece out at first. It's the opposite, whatever I said. Okay, and if it works that way, then it did. And then Gideon got the biggest army he could. And what did God tell him? Small army. So then he drink to where they only had how many? 300, right? To fight the battle and to win. All right. Now, I'm Mark Ray version of Gideon if you're trying to tell it really fast, okay? Now, looking at that, do you just look at him and say, man, what a faithful guy? God, I'm not really sure. And God, I'm not really sure. And over and over and over. Oh, God, I'm not really sure. He's not a faithful giant who needs to be in the Faith Hall of Fame. So why is he included? He overcame his fear. Okay, you and I, in the book of to whom the book of Hebrews is written, and they're floundering. Okay, they're not able to the gospel, but my family really. But you know, I've had these customs the whole time I've lived, and I know about Jesus Christ, but life is all. And you bring up Gideon, took care of it. He's trying to show God will take care of you when you obey. That's the point he's trying to get across here. Look at our next guy, Barak, or Barak, okay? The Midianites, isn't it? And what's her name? Starts with a D? Deborah. Good. And Deborah says, I don't really want to fight. Well, Barak, you go and fight. Well, I'll go if you go with me. If you hold my... Well, you know, it's not going to happen that way. If I go, you're not going to get any of the glory with the tent peg and the temple and all that business with warm milk. Does he look like a giant of faith? No, he's scared. And Deborah's whole song in Judges chapter 5 is on how men are, if the leaders in Israel would lead, oh, how great it would be. If leaders in Israel would stand, we would all cheer. Those we're talking about. Barak, great country song. Maybe the first country song ever written was Judges 5. He's got to have somebody escort him everywhere he goes, and he's just never sure. But he goes through, and he does it. And so you see what the Hebrew writer, and now he's going through and saying, look, even the people we make fun of in the Old Testament, God takes care of them. God sees them through. All right, Samson, Judges 13 through 16. All right, he's strong. He's strong. Kill 600 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. You always wonder what number 599 was thinking, okay? Why are you standing in line? But crops of the Philistines by getting those foxes and tying their tails together and lighting it on fire. But even though physically he was strong, spiritually, oh, he's horrible. He made his parents sin in public by giving them honey and them coming up with a riddle. The whole purpose of that riddle was to shame his parents. He kept finding women who were absolutely bad news for him. And he ended up being stupid with Delilah, a woman he never even married, was just living with her. You know, she says, hey, what can I do to get rid of your strength? And he says, well, just, weave my hair a certain way. And she invites the Philistines over. He breaks the weaves and ends up killing all the Philistines. She comes back and he says, well, if you just bind it with cords, then I'll die. And then she invites the Philistines over, and he breaks the cords and defeats the Philistines. Now, after the fourth or fifth time that happened, would you really tell her this? He's not the smartest guy in the world, but he finally tells her, right? And then he has his eyes gouged out, his muscles are gone. He's used as an oxen, just treading grain. And what happens at the end? He's in the great temple with 400 or 4,000, I think. It's a good number of Philistines. And the greatest act of faith he ever has is giving his life to destroy the enemy of God's people. The faith of Samson is not seen until the end of his life, Judges chapter 16. It's fascinating, these people he's pulling out. Because what you and I usually think about Samson, we don't think of as being faithful. We focus on the part when he had no faith. He just trusted in himself. And then he would get in an argument with God and say, God, you're no good. You're letting me die. His power is seen at the end when he learned to rely. Jephthah, what do we know about Jephthah? First of all, he was the son of a harlot. More so, he made a vow. What was that vow? First thing comes out of my door, I'm going to sacrifice. He's trying to show himself off and say, I'm super proud that I'm going to lead. He expects a goat. He expects maybe a calf to walk out his door. Would have been all right if it would have been a kitty cat, right? What was it walked out his door? His daughter. And the great discussion we always love to have, did he really sacrifice her? And, I've seen smart people go either way. I think he killed her. He was just that kind of guy. But we don't know. But we see his faithfulness even in a guy who's not too bright and even in a guy who's not too faithful. We do see his faithfulness to God. And so I'm fascinated when he comes through here and gets these guys. Okay, of course, there's David. David's a big guy, man after God's own heart. Was he faithful in everything he did? Did he have a few warts and spots and stains? What ended up being the high point or maybe the low point of his life? Her name starts with B, Bathsheba. Okay, he sinned against Bathsheba. He sinned against Uriah. And he received a fourfold payment for his sins, right? The child died. His concubines were openly shamed. His son died, and his other son died. So you go through and you see where David really pays for his sins. And yet he's faithful. Then, of course, you have Samuel, the only man to hold the office of judge, prophet, and priest. I guess you could say Jesus did as well. Samuel is perhaps one of the key figures of the Old Testament. We don't study him very often, but he's pretty fascinating. Okay, we go through all these people. In conclusion, these women are not people with superhuman powers. They're ordinary folks with flaws. Their faith in God allows them to accomplish great things by God's power. When we yield ourselves to God and are active in our belief, great things will be accomplished. All right, the point we're getting across here, especially from 30 to where we're at, you don't have to be perfect to be used in God's power. Now, shall we sin that grace may abound? God forbid. That's not a license to say, I'll live every way I want. God will take care of it. What we're getting at here is God uses imperfect people to do his perfect work. A lot of times, I feel inadequate. And you, if you're honest with yourself, will feel inadequate in the Lord's service. Because we see our shortcomings, we see our failures, we see where we fall short, and we think, God can't use me. I'm not usable because I'm just so weak. But God's strength is shown through man's weakness. God's wisdom is shown through man's foolishness. And God will use you when you give yourself fully to him. And so for these folks who are wavering and wanting to go back to Judaism because they're having so much trouble in Christianity, and they feel so inadequate in Christianity, and they're enduring so much tribulation, before they go back to the old way, the writer of Hebrews is trying to push them back and say, God will use you. You're exactly what God wants. If God can make Gideon work, and if God can make Samson work, and if God can make Jephthah work, he can use you. And he can use me. The Faith Hall of Fame is about us. It's not about these people who are action figures who we imagine to be right on the hilltop and so much better and greater than each one of us. There are people with failures and shortcomings. And God will work through them to accomplish great things. Absolutely, it's the power of faith. You're correct. Absolutely it is. Absolutely. And we far too often don't emphasize that. The power that's there. How I'm not pleasing to God by my own intellect and by my own strength and by my own decisions. Is God working through us? As Paul would say in Colossians, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Is God working through us? It's the power of faith. Excellent point. Excellent. Okay, let's look at the end of verse 32. Well, let's go. And the prophets, looking here at verse 33, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had a trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, and tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and dens and caves of the earth. And all these, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive. It is something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. All right. Wowzers, that is a list right there, okay? And the temptation is just flip over it and say, wow, that's a cool list. Okay, chapter 12, all right? That tends to be what I want to do. Let's go ahead and look through each one. Subdued kingdoms, okay? Probably we're looking here at Moses as he overcame the nations of Og and Sidon in the wilderness on his way over. Worked righteousness. Of course, Israel subdued the promised land. They followed God. Obtained the promises. When did Israel obtain the promises? What were the promises they obtained and fulfilled? I'll make you a great nation, give you a promised land, and you're going to have lots and lots and lots of children, right? As many as the stars of the sky. Okay? Did they obtain those promises? Yeah, they fought for that promised land, didn't they? They destroyed Jericho and Ai and the kings of the north and kings of the south. They destroyed those people and were able to overcome and have that area. Okay? Did they have lots of children? We're around 2.9 million when we leave Egypt. We're about 1.6 when we enter into the promised land. And we reproduce greatly after that. So yeah, they did that. Okay? Stop the mouths of lions. Wow. Who do you think of about stopping the mouths of lions? I ran across 3 times in the Old Testament. Who stopped the mouths of lions? Who? David? Yeah. That's the third one I thought of. Look at that. You're smarter than me. It took me a while to think of David. All right, David. He's standing before Saul about Goliath. What does he say? There's a giant over here. What have I done in the past? I killed a bear, killed a lion. If I can kill a bear and kill a lion, giant, not so bad, right? That's what he's saying. So he was able to put to death a lion. Okay, who else stopped the mouths of lions? Samson, okay. Samson's just walking down the road one day. A lion attacks. What does he do? Grabs it by the jaws and just rips it apart, throws it to the side of the road. That's one mean fella, right? And he's over here taking care of lions. Carcass, the rib area, produces that honey. And that's the reason why it was a sin for him to eat honey and to give it to his parents, because it came from a dead animal. It was unclean. Now, he never told his parents. He's going to announce to his parents at his wedding through that riddle that they were actually unclean, even though they're sitting among all those Philistines. Okay? And who's the third one? You got to hang and spend a night with them. That's the first one I thought of. Yeah, Daniel, right? That's the first one I thought of. Because he prayed 3 times a day and broke the king's edict, he was thrown down into the lion's den. Okay? Daniel chapter 6 is where that is. Okay? Quench the violence of fire. Okay, who are we thinking of here? Through 30. Were thrown into the fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thrown into that fire, and the fourth one appeared like the son of the gods, as he would say. Actually, it turned out to be the Son of God. God is with them no matter what they faced, okay? Escaped the edge of the sword. I'm thinking he's probably, if he's going chronologically through the Hebrew Bible, he's probably talking about Esther here. Remember Esther, Mordecai, and who's the bad guy? Starts with H. Haman. Remember Haman? Haman's gallows. All right. Esther, by going before the king in her humility and in her faithfulness, and by God's providence, Esther chapter 4, verse 14, best verse in the Bible on providence. She, by her faith, she saved her people from the edge of the sword. Okay. Out of weakness became strong. Out of this, I wrote Gideon, Abraham, Goliath, or David and Goliath and Jonathan. Okay. Now remember, I think the best verse on this is 1 Samuel chapter 14 and verse 6, where Samuel is chewing out Saul, which seemed to happen pretty often. And he said, don't you realize that Saul was really dealing with Napoleon syndrome? You ever heard of Napoleon syndrome? Or somebody who's short, or somebody who feels like they don't measure up, always overcompensate? Saul, when he was chosen as king, hid among the luggage, was always worried about somebody looking better, was always worried about what everybody else thought. And Samuel came to him in 1 Samuel 14:6 and said, don't you realize God takes those who are small and makes them great? Recognize God is with you. Don't worry about what everybody else is thinking. Okay? Valiant in battle, defeated armies of aliens. That's probably many instances. For those who wonder, those aliens are not the ET dudes. They're the illegal aliens. They're the Canaanites who they fought against. So they probably didn't find a lot of ET dudes at this time. Okay? Women received the dead. Okay? Who would this be? Resurrections in the Old Testament. You remember many resurrections? Elisha and Elijah both raised a widow's son. Okay? That's 1 Kings 17, also 2 Kings 4. Okay? Tortures, okay? There's many instances in tortures, especially in the Apocrypha, which would be included in the Catholic Bible. It's not inspired like what we have in our Bibles, but it's some history in those 400 years. Many people were tortured. Okay, sawn in two. Here's Bible trivia. According to tradition, what prophet was sawn in two? You remember? He's a big prophet too, 66 chapters. Isaiah, right, Isaiah. Theoretically, according to tradition, he got the king angry. The king put him in a hollow tree trunk and then sawed the tree trunk in half. And that's the way Isaiah died. That's the tradition, which is there. We don't know. It's never written anywhere in the Old Testament how he died. We don't know exactly what happened. But according to the Apocrypha and according to legend, that's how he died. We just know in Hebrews 11, someone was sawn in two. It's probably Isaiah that he's looking towards. Each one of these people who came through, the world was not worthy. Now, you apply that again to what we're talking about, these Hebrew folks, these people who have become Christians, right? What are these people saying? Hey, you're better than that. You don't need to be a Christian. You don't need to give up your family. And you don't need to give up your jobs. And you don't need to leave your culture. You need to come back. And what the writer of Hebrews is saying is, hey, listen, those who are in the church, the world isn't worthy of these kind of people. These are the best people who are around. The greatest people who live today are Christians. Are there richer people? Yeah. Are there more famous people? Sure. Are there people who have more? Yes. People with less troubles? Yes. But nobody in this world is better than a Christian. Because if you're obedient to God, you are fulfilling God's purpose for humankind. God is super impressed with you. As we read earlier in Hebrews 11, God is proud to be called their God, and God is proud to wear their name. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for the longest time, how did God always introduce himself to Moses and others? I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What's God saying today? He's saying, hey, I'm the God of so-and-so. I'm the God of so-and-so. Have you seen how the gospel is working through these people? It's God's glory. The world is not worthy of Christians. Be proud of who you are. Be proud of how you live. Be proud of what God has done through you. Not with the sinful pride where you think you're better than everybody else and where you look down on everybody else. But recognize how special the gift of salvation and gift of adoption is and how important you are. Okay, They did not receive the promise. Okay? What do we mean they did not receive the promise? Moses led those children of Israel for 120 years. Did he ever get to go into the promised land? What did he get to do? God took him on a mountaintop and said, look, that's what you're shooting for. That's where he took him. That's as far as he ever got to go. Okay? Abraham, did he ever get to build a house on all that land he had? Never did. That promise wouldn't be fulfilled for about 600 years. And you go through all these people. Sometimes they receive some worldly gifts. David, he had a lot of stuff. Daniel seemed to be fairly wealthy, but they never received that gift. Us today, we know what we're getting. We've received that gift of eternal life. We received the gift of the church. God is working through us to accomplish great things. That's one thing we hardly ever realize. How much better we have it than those folks in the Old Testament. Now, every once in a while I think, man, I wish I could go back there. That'd be so awesome to hang out with Moses and see the plagues and see the Red Sea open and have like manna and quail show up and everything. Where we are, it's much better. I think sometimes, man, I wish I was one of those apostles and I got to see Jesus feed the 5,000 and I got to see him, heal the ear of Malchus, as Corey was reading about earlier. What we have is much better because we have a full understanding. We receive the promises. We receive the promises given to us from God. There is something better for each one of us. Okay? Something better, which is awaiting. All right, so you run through the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. What are some of the lessons we notice? You get any lessons from here? Things I left out? Brother McIntosh, you mentioned something to me about faith. Do you remember what it was? You pointed out, I think it's the words, the prepositions.
Okay, in this chapter 11, you have the terms by faith, through faith, and in faith.
Right.
And I was wondering if they are basically the same thing or if they are different.
Okay. What he...
Verse 13 says they died in faith. I can understand dying in faith. I can't understand dying by faith or through faith. Therefore, there must be a difference.
Okay. What he brings up is this idea of faith and the revolving of the three prepositions. In faith, through faith, and by faith. Now, you can die in faith. What is faith? Faith is a noun, right? Faith is a noun. What is it when we call it a noun? The faith. What is the faith? Okay. The faith has once for all been delivered unto the saints, right, Jude? Okay, it's the teachings of God, the corporate structure, okay? So in faith, they died in faith. But faith is not just a noun, it's also a verb. It's also other things. You go through faith. How do you go through faith? These things he did through faith or in faith or by faith. Okay, by the guidance of faith. And that's an excellent point you bring up. What he's doing the word for faith is called pistos, P-I-S-T-O-S. I'm a redneck Greek dude, so it's pistos to me. But it's pistos if you're talking a word around. And you'll notice, I think he revolves it as he goes through faith, in faith, by faith. And he talking about the different ways faith, but you also live through your faith, and you live by your faith. A lot better than that which is right. Stuff in Hebrews. When you take Greek, when you study Greek, John is a very educated person, and John writes very clear and succinct writing. He goes through, and it's almost like reading Dr. Seuss sometimes. You go through it, so it's easy to translate. After you get up to about with some Paul stuff. Now, Paul talks like a doctor would write. You ever try to translate something that the doctor writes, and you're like, what in the world? For example, and he just keeps going and, comma, or whatever else. You think, what in the world's happening? Hebrews is kind of a medium between the two. It's not, but there is a lot more neat stuff that you see through those words there. But you sent that to me and everything to look at that way. Okay, other things you've noticed over as well. Yeah, Samson and Jephthah and Gideon. Right. Right. You may notice this about us at church. Have you noticed we're different? Have you noticed that yet? You got old folks, you got young folks, right? Got folks who've been married forever, got people who've been single forever, right? We're different. Now, more importantly, spiritually, we're different. We've got people, a brother asking me last week, he said, have you gone through the church and noticed Benton? He was talking about those 4-generation families and what heritage is there and how that's pretty cool. And that's neat. But we also have new converts. God has put the Abrahams and the Noahs, people who, man, they are awesome in the church. But God has also given us a few Rahabs and Gideons who they're faithful, but man, they've got a lot more struggle. Because by mixing us together, it really makes a faith family. You get what I'm saying? By putting us together, you really see how interesting it is. The gospel applies to every one of us. Now, in some ways, it applies differently. You know, some folks, they've been married a long time. There's really no problems in their marriage necessarily. They struggle in other places. And other folks are showing their gift of grace just by staying married because they married a booger, you know. They married somebody it's hard to be married to. Well, God can shine through one person the same way he shines through another. And each one of us show our faith. And each one of us is needed by more important or less important than anyone else. I had told myself I was going to let y'all out early. Pretend y'all did not hear that bell, okay? All right. Thank you very much for being here. Lord willing, next week we'll study chapter 12.